A cleaner pushed open the wrong door at the wrong time and accidentally saved a Mafia boss's $30 million deal with one sentence in perfect Russian. He asked who she really was. She said, "Nobody." He decided she couldn't leave. Now the woman who arrived with a mop cart holds the key to his empire's survival, and every enemy knows it. Before we proceed, make sure you click the subscribe button so you could be part of the first people to be notified of our upcoming videos. Are you done? Let's continue. The glass conference table reflected the dim overhead lights like black ice as Andrei Volkov's fist came down hard enough to crack the silence. "Tell them we haven't touched their shipment." His translator, a nervous, sweating man named Paul Hendricks, fumbled with his notes, his hands shaking. The two Russian men across the table sat perfectly still, their faces carved from granite. The one on the left, Dmitry Volkov, wore a charcoal suit with cufflinks that probably cost more than most people made in a year. His eyes were winter in Moscow. "Yes, Mr. Volkov." Paul cleared his throat and spoke in halting textbook Russian. Andrei didn't need to speak the language to know something was catastrophically wrong. He'd built his empire on reading micro-expressions, on sensing danger before it arrived. And right now Dmitry's face was shifting from stone to something far more dangerous. The Russian stood abruptly. His associate followed like a shadow. "Wait." Andrei's voice was controlled, but his hand moved in a gesture that made his 6 bodyguards along the walls tense. Paul was already stammering in broken Russian, his words tumbling over each other. Dmitry's response was cold, clipped, venomous. "What did he say?" Andrei demanded. Paul went white as paper. He said we've insulted his family name. I think I confused the word for secure with something else. Something very bad. "You think?" Andrei's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, which somehow filled the room with more menace than any shout could. "This deal is worth $30 million, Paul. You think you insulted them?" The room held its breath. This wasn't a problem that bullets could solve. This required precision. The right words, the right tone, the kind of cultural fluency that could mean the difference between alliance and war. Dmitry spoke again, his voice like a knife being drawn from a sheath. Paul swallowed audibly. He's saying the Volkov name means nothing to Americans, that we're amateurs playing at his level. He's leaving." Andrei's jaw clenched. 6 months of careful negotiation. Territory agreements, weapons routes, supply chain logistics. All of it crumbling because of one incompetent translator. The Russians moved toward the door. The other families would hear about this within the hour. His council would question his leadership. Rivals would circle like wolves sensing wounded prey. That's when the door opened. Not a knock, just opened. A woman stepped in, maybe late 20s, wearing a faded gray cleaning uniform with Meridian Services embroidered on the chest pocket. She pushed a metal cart loaded with supplies, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun. She looked completely, absurdly out of place in a room that smelled of expensive cigars and barely contained violence. "Sorry, I thought this room was..." She stopped. Her eyes swept across the scene. Andrei's rigid posture, the Russians halfway to the door, Paul on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and 6 armed men trying not to reach for their weapons. Her expression shifted. "Oh, bad timing. Get out." One of Andrei's guards stepped forward, his voice low and threatening, but Dmitry had turned. He glanced at the cleaning cart, then at the woman, and said something in rapid Russian, probably ordering her to leave as well. The cleaning woman blinked. Then, to the shock of every person in the room, she responded in flawless, fluid Russian. The room went silent. Dmitry's eyebrows rose, the first real emotion he'd shown all night. He said something else, longer this time, almost conversational. "Test." The woman set her hand on the cart and replied, her tone respectful but confident. She even inclined her head slightly, the exact depth Andrei had seen Dmitry use when they first entered. "What the hell is happening?" Andrei muttered. The conversation continued. The cleaning woman spoke, her Russian flowing naturally, with none of Paul's textbook hesitation. Dmitri listened, his posture shifting from confrontational to curious. His associate's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Paul stood frozen, his face a mask of confusion and creeping dread. Finally, the woman turned to Andrei. "Okay, so your guy here," she gestured at Paul, "told them that your organization treats the Volkov family like dogs and that you're essentially, defecating on their ancestors' graves. That's not what you meant to say, right?" Andrei stared at her. "No, that is not even remotely what I meant to say." "Yeah, I figured." She turned back to Dmitri and spoke again in Russian, her hands moving in small, precise gestures as she explained something. The tension in the room was dissolving like ice under a blowtorch. Dmitri nodded slowly. He responded, and the woman translated without missing a beat. "He says he appreciates the clarification. He understands that your translator was incompetent." She glanced apologetically at Paul. "Not that you were intentionally disrespectful. He's willing to continue negotiations. But only if I translate." Andrei couldn't keep the surprise out of his voice. "You?" She shrugged, her fingers tapping nervously against the cleaning cart handle. "I mean, unless you want to lose $30 million over the Russian word for partner versus mongrel. It's your call." Andrei looked at Paul, who seemed to be experiencing some kind of existential crisis. Then he looked back at the woman in the gray uniform, this nobody who just walked in from the hallway and saved everything. "What's your name?" She hesitated. For just a moment, Andrei saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear, calculation, the realization that she'd just stepped into something far bigger than a wrong door. "Gina," she said finally. "Gina Lockwood. Gina Lockwood." Andrei repeated it like he was testing how it sounded. Then he gestured to the empty chair at the table, the one Paul had just vacated. "Sit down." "I really should." "Sit down." Dmitri was watching this exchange with keen interest. His arms crossed, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Gina's hand tightened on the cart handle. Then she let go. She walked to the chair and sat. The $30 million negotiation resumed. And Gina Lockwood's invisible life ended forever. The Russian sat back down, but the air in the room still felt like a live wire. Dmitri settled into his chair with the slow precision of a predator deciding whether to strike or simply observe. His eyes never left Gina. Andrei spoke without turning his head. "Tell them the translator left an hour ago. Tell them I didn't know he was gone until they arrived. Tell them I respect their time and I'm willing to proceed if they are." Gina's voice trembled as she translated, but the Russian that came out was flawless. The kind of Moscow accent you couldn't fake, with the formal verb conjugations that showed education, respect. None of Paul's textbook hesitation. Dmitri's eyes narrowed. He responded rapidly, his words coming like machine gun fire. Regional slang. Street idioms. Then a question about Odessa winters that felt less like conversation and more like an interrogation. Gina answered without thinking. She had lived there. Cold mornings walking to school, her grandmother's apartment with a radiator that never worked, the way snow turned gray by noon. Until she was 12. Until her family scraped together enough money to leave. Dmitri exchanged a glance with his companion. They switched to Ukrainian mid-sentence. Gina didn't miss a beat. She understood that too. The negotiation resumed. She translated shipment routes through the Baltic corridor, payment terms that involved offshore accounts in 3 currencies, delivery schedules timed to avoid customs inspections. At one point, she caught a critical mistranslation in the written contract. The customs code Paul had used would have flagged the entire shipment as military-grade weapons instead of industrial equipment. The deal would have collapsed before the ink dried. An hour crawled by. Then 2. Her hands ached from gripping the edge of the table. Her voice was steady even when her heart felt like it might explode. Finally Dmitri stood. He said something in Russian that made his companion laugh. A dark, knowing sound, Gina translated, her face flushing. He says, You should pay your cleaning lady more than your translator. Andre's lips twitched. Almost a smile. Tell him I'm considering it. Handshakes followed. Firm grips. Promises to finalize paperwork by Friday. The Russians left with a kind of satisfied confidence that came from getting exactly what they wanted. The door closed with a soft click that sounded deafening. Gina stood immediately, trembling. I should sit. Andre's tone hadn't changed from the beginning of the night. Authoritative. But now they were alone except for 2 bodyguards stationed by the door like statues. He studied her for a long moment. She felt dissected under that gaze. What's your name? Gina. Gina Lockwood. Where did you learn Russian, Gina Lockwood? She explained haltingly. Immigrant parents who spoke it at home. Growing up switching between 2 languages like changing clothes. A linguistics degree she'd started at 20, full of naive dreams about translation work at the UN. Then pregnancy at 21. Dropping out. A series of bad choices that felt inevitable in hindsight. Bad luck that felt like gravity. Andre listened without interrupting. His expression gave away nothing. Then he said, I need you to come back tomorrow night. Same time. To help finalize the contract. I can't. Have a daughter. I can't get involved in. $5,000. Gina's breath caught. $5,000 would cover 3 months of rent in their cramped apartment. Daycare for Lily so she could stop relying on her neighbor's teenager. Maybe even a security deposit to move out of their neighborhood where gunshots sometimes woke them at night. 1 meeting, Andre said. 2 hours. That's all. She wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed to grab her cart and run and never look back. But $5,000. Okay. Andre nodded once. My people will contact you tomorrow with details. He gestured toward the door. She was dismissed. Gina grabbed her cart and fled, the wheels squeaking as she pushed it too fast down the hallway. She didn't see Andre watching her leave. His expression thoughtful, calculating. She didn't see him nod to the bodyguard by the door, a silent command that needed no words. And she definitely didn't see that same bodyguard slip out 5 minutes later, following her beat-up Honda through the city streets, noting her address, her building, the ground floor window where a small shadow moved behind thin curtains. By the time Gina parked and climbed the stairs to her apartment, she was already being watched. She just didn't know it yet. The black sedan arrived at 7:30, idling outside her apartment building like a predator. Gina had spent the day in a fog, going through the motions with Lily. Breakfast, cartoons, pretending everything was normal. The babysitter arrived early, a neighbor's teenage daughter who asked no questions when handed 3 20s instead of the usual 10. The driver didn't speak, just held the door open and waited. Inside the car, a garment bag hung from a hook. Gina unzipped it with trembling fingers. Black business suit, silk blouse, heels in her exact size. Someone had measured her. Someone had been watching long enough to know her measurements, her style, her shoe size. The realization made her skin crawl. She changed in the back seat, hands shaking as she buttoned the blouse. The suit fit like it had been tailored for her body. 'Cause it had been. The restaurant was in the financial district, the kind of place where reservations required 6 weeks' notice and a second mortgage. Tonight it was dark except for one private dining room in the back. The maitre d' didn't ask questions, just gestured toward the hallway with the vacant efficiency of someone paid very well to see nothing. The Russians were already seated. Dmitry Volkov watched her enter with the same predatory assessment as the night before. His companion, the younger one with the scar bisecting his eyebrow, didn't bother hiding his suspicion. Andre sat at the head of the table, composed and unreadable. And beside him, a third man Gina didn't recognize. American late 50s military haircut going gray at the temples. A Rolex caught the light as he lifted a glass of scotch. His eyes were the flat gray of old steel. Ms. Lockwood. Andre's voice was silk over iron. Thank you for coming. She wanted to say she didn't have a choice. Instead, she nodded and sat where indicated. The meeting began immediately. No pleasantries. No preamble. The Americans wanted in. The third man, introduced only as Miller, represented interests that extended far beyond Chicago. Supply routes across 3 countries. Territory in Eastern Europe. Weapons shipments that made the original deal look like a corner store transaction. $50 million. Gina translated, her voice steadier than her hands. Russian to English. English to Russian. Technical specifications for armaments she'd only seen in news footage. Legal terminology that danced around words like smuggling and trafficking. Payment structures designed to evaporate under federal scrutiny. Dmitri leaned back in his chair, studying her over steepled fingers. When the conversation hit a natural pause, he spoke in Russian. His tone conversational but his eyes cold. "Tell me about your daughter, Ms. Lockwood." "Lily, yes. 7 years old." Gina's blood turned to ice. She translated mechanically, watching Andre's expression tighten almost imperceptibly. "She attends Lincoln Elementary," Dmitri continued, still smiling. "The school with the blue playground. You pick her up every day at 3:15. "Dmitri." Andre's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He didn't raise his voice, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "We're here to discuss business." The Russian held his gaze for a long moment, then shrugged and switched back to the contracts. But the message was clear. Gina wasn't just useful. She was leverage. She was collateral. And if she became a problem, they knew exactly where to apply pressure. The meeting stretched past midnight. Her throat was raw from translating. Her head pounded from concentration. But somewhere in the exhaustion, she realized something else. She was good at this. Terrifyingly good. She caught nuances the men themselves missed. Spotted contradictions in payment schedules. Identified a clause that would have given Miller's people an advantage the Russians hadn't intended. When she pointed it out, carefully, diplomatically, Dmitri's eyes flickered with something that might have been respect, or might have been fear. When it finally ended, handshakes were exchanged. Papers were signed. Dmitri nodded to her once before leaving. His expression inscrutable. Andre walked her to the car. Handed her an envelope without ceremony. "Same time next week. We finalize everything then." Gina waited until she was home, until the babysitter was paid and gone, until Lily was asleep, before opening the envelope. $10,000 in cash. Crisp hundreds bundled with a paper band. Twice what he'd promised. And underneath, a note in clean, precise handwriting. "We'll be in touch." Gina sat at her kitchen table, staring at more money than she'd made in 6 months of scrubbing toilets and emptying trash cans. Blood money. Money that came from deals that would put weapons in the hands of people who would use them. Money stained with violence she couldn't see but knew existed. Money that could pay rent for half a year. That could buy Lily new clothes, good food, maybe even dental work Gina had been putting off. Money that came with a price she couldn't calculate. She didn't sleep that night. Just sat in the dark, watching the shadows, feeling the weight of the cash in her hands and the heavier weight of what accepting it meant. By dawn, the envelope was hidden in the heating vent. And Gina Lockwood was someone different than she'd been 2 days ago. She just didn't know what that someone was yet. The luxury apartment had become a gilded cage with guards who smiled politely while blocking every exit. Gina couldn't leave without escorts who appeared the moment she touched the door handle. But inside, she could move freely through the marble halls and designer furniture that felt nothing like home. And sometimes when Andre worked late, she was summoned to the penthouse office upstairs. Tonight was one of those nights. She'd been called up to translate a document, something about shipping manifests and port schedules written in a mix of Russian and bureaucratic jargon. When she arrived, Andre was on the phone, his back to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He gestured for her to wait without breaking his conversation. Gina sat in the leather chair across from his desk and tried not to listen. Tried to make herself invisible the way she'd spent her whole life doing. But she heard anyway. Don't care what it takes. The Russian deal closes Friday or we lose the territory to the Italians. Dimitri's already getting nervous about the missing shipment. And if we can't deliver? Andrei turned slightly and saw her sitting there. His expression didn't change, but his words did. He switched immediately to coded language, names replaced with numbers, locations with vague directional terms. Gina looked down at the document in her lap and pretended she hadn't heard anything. 20 minutes later, she was alone in the office, filing the translated papers in the cabinet Andrei had indicated. He'd stepped out to take another call. The door was open. Voices drifted in from the hallway. Low, careful, the kind of conversation that happened when people thought they were alone. The Russian problem needs to be handled. That was Marcus Reeves, Andrei's second in command. The man with cold eyes who'd picked her up that first night, who'd delivered the business suit that fit too perfectly, who watched her like she was a puzzle he was waiting to solve. The girl knows too much. After Friday we clean it up. Make it look accidental. The timing has to be. Gina's blood turned to ice. The girl. He was talking about her. She didn't hear the rest. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the files. She forced herself to keep filing, keep moving, act normal. When Marcus's footsteps retreated down the hallway, she closed the cabinet with trembling fingers and walked back to the apartment on legs that felt like water. Lily was asleep in the bedroom, curled around the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3. Gina stood in the doorway watching her daughter breathe, and something cold and sharp crystallized in her chest. Someone in Andrei's inner circle wanted her dead. Maybe Marcus was the traitor feeding information to rivals. The missing shipment, the leaked routes, all of it designed to sabotage the deal from the inside. Maybe he just saw her as a loose end that needed tying up once her usefulness expired. The way she was the loose end. And loose ends didn't survive in this world. Gina couldn't run. The guards would stop her before she reached the elevator. She couldn't go to the police. She'd be arrested for everything she'd translated. She couldn't trust Andrei. For all she knew, he'd given Marcus the order himself. So she did the only thing she could. She started gathering information. The next day, when she was called up to translate another document, she paid attention to everything. The names on contracts Andrei left lying on his desk. The phone numbers scribbled on notepads. The coded conversations she wasn't supposed to understand but did anyway. She listened at doors. Memorized schedules. Noted which guards were loyal to Andrei and which ones took their orders from Marcus. She translated documents Andrei gave her, but she also read the ones he didn't. The financial records left in unlocked drawers, the shipping manifests that showed discrepancies between what was recorded and what was actually delivered. She found patterns, inconsistencies, proof that someone was siphoning weapons from shipments before they reached the Volkovs. Someone who had access to Andrei's schedules, his routes, his plans. Someone like Marcus. Gina kept her face blank, her voice steady, her hands from shaking when Marcus walked past her in the hallway with that cold, assessing stare. But inside she was building a case. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was investigating. And if she was going to die after Friday, she'd make damn sure she took the real traitor down with her. Friday night loomed like an execution date. The final meeting was set. The deal would close. $50 million in weapons and territory would change hands across 3 countries. And Gina would be there to translate every word, every clause, every handshake that sealed her usefulness and her fate. Then, presumably, she'd be handled. Thursday afternoon shattered any illusion of control. A shipment went missing. $10 million worth of weapons, en route to the Volkovs through a Baltic corridor that only 5 people knew about. The convoy simply vanished somewhere between the Polish border and the pickup point, swallowed by rivals who'd been waiting in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. The Russians were furious. Gina heard the phone call from the hallway outside Andrei's office. Dimitri's voice came through the speaker like a blade. Sharp, cold, accusing. Andrei of sabotage. Playing both sides. Of thinking the Volkov family were fools who wouldn't notice a setup. Andre's denial was controlled but edged with something Gina had never heard before. Uncertainty. We didn't touch your shipment. Someone leaked the route. Yes. Someone in your organization. Dimitri's response was ice. The only new person who knows our business is your translator. The cleaning woman who appeared so conveniently. Silence stretched like a wire about to snap. She's not involved, Andre said. Then let me ask her myself. I want to interrogate the translator. No. Then we have nothing more to discuss. The deal is off. The line went dead. Gina pressed herself against the wall outside the office, heart hammering. Inside, she heard Andre's fist hit the desk, followed by low, vicious cursing. Then voices. His lieutenants gathering like vultures. Marcus's voice rose above the others, calm and reasonable, suggesting they cut their losses, that maybe the translator was compromised, that the smartest move was damage control. She didn't wait to hear more. She retreated to the apartment, mind spinning. The deal was collapsing. The Russians suspected her. Andre's protection was evaporating by the second. And Marcus was positioning himself perfectly to be the voice of reason in the chaos he'd created. That night she couldn't sleep. Lily was curled against her in the bed, small and warm and utterly vulnerable. Around 2 a.m, Gina heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Then Marcus's voice, low and careful. She crept to the door and pressed her ear against it. Friday night. After the meeting. Make it look like the Russians did it. She gets caught in the crossfire, everybody blames Dimitri, and we get our war. Andre won't suspect anything. He's too busy trying to save his precious deal. By the time he figures it out, we'll control half his territory. Gina's hand flew to her mouth to stop the gasp. Marcus was the traitor. He'd sabotaged the shipment. He was framing her. And he was planning to kill her and blame the Russians, which would destroy the deal, start a war between the families, and leave Marcus perfectly positioned to seize power in the chaos. She had no proof, no allies, no way to convince Andre that his second-in-command was betraying him. No way out. Step 1. She found Agent Nash's card buried in her wallet, the edges worn from the number of times she'd held it, considering. Her hands shook as she dialed. Nash answered on the second ring. Ms. Lockwood. I'll cooperate. Gina's voice was barely a whisper. But I need protection now. Right now. Where are you? Gina gave the address. The building. The floor. We'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't leave the apartment. Don't alert anyone. We'll extract you safely. 20 minutes. Gina could survive 20 minutes. She moved fast. Threw clothes into a duffel bag. Grabbed Lily's rabbit, her daughter's favorite shoes, the photo of Gina's mother she kept by the bed. She woke Lily as gently as she could, pressed a finger to her lips, whispered that they were going on an adventure and had to be very, very quiet. Lily, bless her, didn't cry. Just nodded with wide, trusting eyes. 15 minutes. Gina checked the door. The hallway was empty. The guards must have rotated shifts. This was their chance. 10 minutes. She shouldered the bag. Took Lily's hand. 5 minutes. They reached the door. Gina turned the handle. The door exploded inward. Not FBI. Not Andre's men. Russians. 3 of them, moving like shadows, their faces hard and professional. One grabbed Gina before she could scream. Another scooped up Lily, covering the little girl's mouth with a gloved hand. The third pressed a cloth over Gina's face. Chemical sweetness flooded her nose and throat. The world tilted. Went gray. Went black. Cold woke her before consciousness did. The kind of cold that seeped through clothes and skin and settled in bones. Gina's eyes opened to darkness broken only by thin strips of moonlight filtering through gaps in a corrugated metal roof. Industrial space. Abandoned. The smell of rust and old motor oil thick in the air. Her wrists were bound behind her with zip ties cutting into skin. Her shoulders screamed from the angle. She was sitting in a metal folding chair that wobbled when she tried to shift her weight. Lily, The word came out as a croak. Your daughter is safe. The voice came from in front of her, speaking Russian. As her eyes adjusted, she saw him. Dmitry Volkov, sitting across from her in another folding chair like they were having coffee instead of whatever this was. As long as you cooperate. Terror flooded through her, sharp and chemical. Where is she? What did you do? She's warm. She's fed. She's watching cartoons in another room with one of my men who has 3 daughters of his own. Dmitry leaned forward, his face emerging from shadow. No anger. No theatrics. Just cold businesslike focus. Whether she stays safe depends entirely on you. Gina's breath came in short, painful gasps. She forced herself to slow down. To think. Dmitry continued in Russian, his words precise. No more games, Ms. Lockwood. No more lies. I know you're more than a cleaner who happened to walk into the wrong room. So tell me, who do you really work for? CIA. FBI. One of the rival syndicates. I'm nobody, Gina said, her voice shaking but the Russian flawless. I'm exactly what I said. A woman who made a mistake. Nobody who makes mistakes speaks 6 dialects of Russian. Nobody who cleans floors understands international banking codes. Dmitry's eyes were winter. So tell me the truth, or I make a phone call, and your daughter disappears into a system you will never find her in. The fury came then, burning through the terror. How dare he? How dare any of them? She'd never asked for this. Never wanted to be pulled into their world of money and violence and lies. She'd just been trying to survive, trying to give her daughter a life better than the one she'd had, and they'd turned her into a pawn in a game she didn't understand. You want the truth. Gina's voice rose, the Russian coming faster now. Fine. I walked into a conference room to clean it. I heard your people accusing Andre of betrayal. I translated one sentence. One. And that was supposed to be the end of it. But Andre wouldn't let me leave. He paid me. He moved me into a gilded prison. And now you've kidnapped me because someone in his organization is setting us both up. Dmitry's expression didn't change. Us both. Yes. Gina leaned forward as much as the zip ties would allow. You think I'm working with Andre? I'm not. You think Andre stole your shipment? He didn't. Marcus Reeves did. That got a reaction. The slightest narrowing of Dmitry's eyes. Gina pressed on. I heard him on the phone. Marcus sabotaged your shipment. He's been feeding information to your rivals. He wants this deal to fail. He wants you to blame Andre or Andre to blame you, because when you go to war, he takes over half of Andre's territory in the chaos. Convenient accusation, Dmitry said. Blame the man who isn't here. Then verify it. Gina's voice was steady now, the translator in her taking over. The shipment that went missing, it was supposed to go through the Gdansk route, correct? But the manifests Andre showed you listed the Kaliningrad corridor. Marcus changed them. The account number for the payment. It's been routing through a shell company in Cyprus that Marcus controls. The next shipment is scheduled for Saturday night through the southern border. But Marcus has already told your rivals where and when. She recited bank account numbers from memory. Names of suppliers she'd translated in contracts. GPS coordinates she'd glimpsed on Andre's desk. Details only someone with access to Andre's private conversations and documents would know. Dmitry sat back. His hand moved to his phone. He made a call. Spoke rapid Russian to whoever answered. Listen. Questions. His eyes stayed on Gina the entire time, but his expression shifted incrementally. Doubt becoming consideration becoming calculation. He ended the call. Silence stretched between them like a wire. Ty umnaya, Dmitry said finally. Slishkom umnaya. You're smart. Too smart. Yakochu tolkeo vitsit, Gina replied. I just want to survive. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across Dmitry's face. Mozit biwe. Maybe. He stood. Moved toward her. Reached for something at his belt. A knife. Gina's breath caught. He moved behind her and she felt the zip ties loosen. Crash. The warehouse door exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood and twisted metal. Smoke grenades hit the concrete floor. Hissing, billowing gray clouds that swallowed everything. Shouting in English. Running footsteps. The metallic click of weapons being readied. Andrei's team. Dmitri cursed in Russian and dove for cover. Gina didn't wait. She'd been sawing her zip ties against a jagged edge of broken metal on the chair frame for the last 10 minutes while she talked, working the plastic back and forth until it was nearly through. Now she twisted hard, felt the ties snap, and rolled sideways as the first gunshots cracked through the air. She hit the concrete behind a wooden crate, her shoulder screaming. More gunfire. Shouting. The warehouse had become a war zone. She crawled along the wall, staying low, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. There, on the ground near an overturned table. Phone. One of Dimitri's men must have dropped it. She grabbed it. Dialed with shaking fingers. Nash. It's Gina Lockwood. Warehouse District, South End, near the old rail yards. 2 crime families about to kill each other. Send everyone. She dropped the phone and ran for the exit she'd spotted along the far wall. Behind her, the gunfight intensified. Someone screamed. Glass shattered. The smoke was so thick she could barely see 3 feet ahead. She hit the exit door with her shoulder, stumbled outside into cold night air that felt like salvation, and nearly collided with Andrei. He stood beside a black SUV, flanked by 4 of his men, all armed. His eyes locked on her, taking in her torn clothes, the zip tie marks on her wrists, the blood on her temple where she'd hit the concrete. "Where's my daughter?" Gina's voice cracked. Andrei pointed to the SUV. Gina ran, wrenched open the door. And there was Lily, small and tear-stained but alive, sitting in the back seat with a stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. "Mama!" Gina climbed in and pulled her daughter into her arms, sobbing. Holding her so tight it must have hurt, but Lily didn't complain, just clung back just as desperately. Behind her, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The warehouse was surrounded now. FBI vehicles, local police, SWAT teams taking positions. Agent Nash emerged from a black sedan, flanked by agents in tactical gear. "Ms. Lockwood." Nash approached carefully, her weapon holstered but her hand near it. "You're safe now." But Andrei was still standing there 20 feet away, surrounded by his men. His expression was unreadable. Not angry, not relieved, just calculating. Their eyes met across the distance. And Gina realized with cold, absolute certainty. This wasn't over. Not even close. The FBI held them for 18 hours. Separate rooms. Separate questions. The warehouse became a crime scene cordoned off with yellow tape, while forensic teams photographed shell casings and blood spatter, and tried to piece together what had happened from the wreckage of violence. But evidence was thin. No one was talking. The Russians had lawyers who arrived within the hour. Expensive men in expensive suits who spoke about diplomatic immunity and international incidents. Andrei's people said nothing at all, invoking their Fifth Amendment rights with the practiced ease of people who'd done this before. Even the physical evidence told a confused story. Gunfire from multiple directions, no clear aggressor, everything murky enough that charging anyone would be a prosecutor's nightmare. By morning, Andrei was released. So were the Russians. So was Gina. Nash caught her in the parking lot as she was buckling Lily into a borrowed car seat, the morning sun harsh and unforgiving after a night of fluorescent lights and repetitive questions. "Ms. Lockwood." Nash's voice was tired but sharp. "You have a choice to make. The deal falls apart and everyone walks away, or you testify and we can build a case. But you have to choose." Gina looked at her daughter, exhausted and confused, clutching that damn stuffed rabbit like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world. She thought about witness protection. New names, new city. Always looking over her shoulder. Always wondering if the past would catch up. But she'd learned something in that warehouse, in those terrible hours bound to a chair with her daughter's life hanging by a thread. She was the only person both sides trusted now. The only one who'd proven herself to the Russians and survived Andrei's world. The only variable that could still save this from becoming open war. I need to make a call, Gina said. Nash's jaw tightened. Ms. Lockwood. Give me 1 hour. She drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks away, left Lily with a chocolate croissant and cartoons on her phone, and dialed the number she'd memorized days ago. Andre answered on the 3rd ring. Ms. Lockwood. I'll finish the translation, Gina said without preamble. One last meeting. Then I'm done. Silence stretched across the line. Then, why would you do that? Because if this deal collapses, Marcus wins. The Russians blame you. You blame them. Everyone goes to war. And Marcus slides in to take half your territory while you're busy killing each other. Gina's voice was steady. And I don't let traitors win. More silence. She could almost hear him thinking, calculating, weighing trust against suspicion. Finally, Friday, p.m. I'll send the location. Neutral territory, Gina said. And I'm bringing insurance. What kind of insurance? The kind that keeps everyone honest. She ended the call before he could respond. Friday arrived like a storm on the horizon. The meeting was set in a private room at a hotel near the airport. Neutral ground, equidistant from everyone's territory, with enough exits that paranoia could be managed. Every side came armed. Every side came with backup waiting in vehicles outside. The tension was so thick Gina could taste it like metal on her tongue. Andre sat at one end of the table. Dmitri at the other. Between them, contracts worth $50 million in weapons and territory. And Gina in the middle, the translator who'd somehow become the linchpin holding this fragile piece together. She translated the closing documents, shipment schedules, payment terms, territory boundaries. Her voice was steady even though her hands wanted to shake. Lily was with Agent Nash in protective custody, insurance of a different kind. The contracts were nearly complete. Pens were coming out. The moment of signing approaching. Then Gina did something no one expected. She pulled out a folder. Set it on the table between the 2 crime bosses. Before you sign, she said in English, then repeated in Russian. There's something you both need to see. Andrei's eyes narrowed. Dimitri's hand moved closer to his weapon. Gina opened the folder. Bank records, phone logs, financial documents that showed money moving through shell companies. Shipment manifests with timestamps that didn't match. Phone calls made to known rivals at precisely the times when sensitive information had leaked. Marcus Reeves sabotaged your shipment, Gina said, looking at Dmitri. He's been feeding information to your competitors for 6 months. He wanted this deal to fail. He wanted you to go to war. She turned to Andre. Because when you're both weak, he takes over half your operation. She'd had Agent Nash's people pull the financial records. Careful, legal requests through proper channels that the FBI had been building for months. She'd had Dimitri's people verify them independently through their own sources in the banking world. Everything matched. Every piece fit. Marcus, standing behind Andre with 3 other lieutenants, went pale. That's a lie. She's trying to. The account in Cyprus, Gina continued, her voice cutting through his protest. The one receiving payments from the intercepted shipments. It's registered to a shell company you control. The phone records show you called the Kozlov syndicate 2 hours before each leak. She slid the documents across the table. Andre picked them up. Read them. His expression was stone, but something deadly flickered behind his eyes. Marcus moved. His hand went to his jacket. Andre was faster. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Marcus dropped. No dramatic speech. No last words. Just a body hitting expensive carpet, and the sudden sharp smell of cordite and blood. No trial. No debate. Just justice. The room was silent except for ringing ears and ragged breathing. Andre set his gun on the table. Looked at Dmitri. We have a deal to finish. Dmitri studied the body for a long moment. Then he nodded. The contracts were signed. $50 million changed hands through encrypted transfers that happened in seconds. Fortunes moving across borders with a click of keys. Territory boundaries were agreed upon. Supply routes established. The kind of peace that came from mutual profit and mutual respect for each other's capacity for violence. When it was done, Dmitri stood. Shook Andrei's hand. Then he turned to Gina and extended his hand to her. He stood. Took it. His grip was firm, the handshake of equals. "Ty opasnaya zenchina," he said quietly. "You're a dangerous woman." Gina met his eyes without flinching. "Tolkeo cognado. Only when I have to be." Dimitri's lips curved into something that might have been respect. Perhaps that is the most dangerous kind. He left with his men, stepping carefully around Marcus's body like it was just another piece of furniture. Andrei remained seated. The room emptied until it was just the two of them and the corpse no one had bothered to cover. "You're free to go, Ms. Lockwood," Andrei said without looking at her. Gina picked up her bag. Walked to the door. "Up. I did this for my daughter," she said quietly. "Not for you. Not for the money. So she wouldn't grow up wondering if her mother was coming home." "I know." She left him there with his dead lieutenant and his $50 million deal, and walked out into the evening air that smelled like rain and possibility. Agent Nash was waiting with Lily by the parking lot. But this time when Gina took her daughter's hand, she didn't feel like prey. She felt like someone who'd survived. And that made all the difference. 1 week later the call came. Not a request. Summons. Andrei's voice on the phone was polite, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. "My office. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Gina arrived exactly on time, leaving Lily with her neighbor, the kind grandmother who'd been watching her daughter for years and asked no questions about the bruises that had faded from Gina's wrists or the haunted look that sometimes crossed her face when she thought no one was watching. The penthouse office looked different in daylight. Less menacing. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city sprawled below like a kingdom, and Andrei stood before them, hands clasped behind his back, watching the world he controlled. He didn't turn when she entered. Close the door. She did. Sit. She remained standing. Something had changed in her during that warehouse interrogation, during those hours when her daughter's life hung by a thread and the only weapon she had was her mind. She'd learned she didn't have to make herself small anymore. Andrei turned. If he was surprised by her defiance, he didn't show it. He moved to his desk, opened a drawer, and withdrew a folder. "I have a proposal for you, Ms. Lockwood." He set the folder on the desk between them. "A permanent position. Translator. Negotiator. Cultural advisor. You'd handle all international dealings. Russian, Ukrainian, Polish. Eventually we'd expand. The Italians. Chinese. Anyone who requires your particular skills." He named a figure. $200,000 a year. More money than Gina had made in the last 5 years combined. "Protection for you and your daughter. A real apartment, not the cage I kept you in before. Security but discreet. You'd have freedom of movement. A life." Andrei's gray eyes were steady on hers. "You have a gift, Ms. Lockwood. I respect gifts. And I protect what I respect." Gina looked at the folder. "Didn't touch it. You'd have access to resources. Want to finish that linguistics degree. Want your mother brought over from Europe. I know people in immigration. Want Lily in the best private school in the city. Consider it handled." He paused. "You'd matter. You'd be someone who shapes outcomes instead of cleaning up after them." It was a good offer. Maybe even a generous one by the standards of his world. But Gina looked at him and saw the cost written in the lines of his face, in the controlled way he held himself, in the careful distance he maintained from anything resembling normal human connection. Blood. Ways. A life lived in shadows where trust was currency and betrayal was punished with bullets. Where her daughter would grow up knowing what her mother did for money. Where the nice apartment and good school would be built on a foundation of violence that could collapse at any moment. She thought of Marcus's body hitting the floor. The casual efficiency of that execution. No trial. No second chances. Just permanent solutions to temporary problems. "I need time," Gina said. Andrei studied her for a long moment. "You have until Monday." Agent Nash's card was still in her pocket. She'd kept it through everything: the interrogation, the warehouse, the final meeting where Marcus died. Witness protection. New names for her and Lily. A house in some suburb she'd never heard of. Erasure. Safety, but the kind that meant never being herself again, never using her languages, never speaking Russian with her daughter the way her own mother had spoken it with her. Or she could walk away from both. Take Lily and disappear on her own terms. She had money now. The $20,000 Andre had paid her, carefully hidden in 3 different accounts. Enough for a fresh start somewhere. Small town. New job. The kind of invisible life she'd always lived, but this time by choice instead of necessity. 3 paths. 3 futures. And only until Monday to choose. Dawn came cold and clear on Sunday morning. Gina stood outside her apartment building with a duffel bag slung over her shoulder, and Lily buckled into her car seat in the Honda, still half asleep and clutching her stuffed rabbit. She pulled out Andre's business card. Heavy stock. Embossed lettering. A phone number that would connect her to power and danger and a life where she mattered. Then Agent Nash's card. Standard government issue. A number that would erase her, protect her, and trap her in a different kind of cage. She looked at both cards for a long time. Then she looked at Lily in the rearview mirror. Her daughter's face was peaceful in sleep, trusting that wherever they were going, her mother would keep her safe. Gina made her choice. She tucked both cards back into her pocket. Started the engine. The Honda coughed to life like it always did. Familiar and unreliable and hers. She pulled out of the parking space. The city streets were empty this early, the sky turning from black to gray to pale gold. She drove past the turn that would take her to Andre's territory. Past the exit that led to the FBI field office where Nash would be waiting with paperwork and promises. She kept driving. The rearview mirror showed her reflection. Tired eyes, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, the face of a woman who'd walked through fire and somehow made it to the other side. And for the first time in the entire story, since that night she'd pushed open the wrong door and stepped into a world of violence and power and impossible choices, she was smiling. Not a big smile. Not triumphant or relieved or even particularly happy. Just the small, quiet smile of someone who'd finally figured out that being invisible was only a trap if you let it be. That survival didn't have to mean staying small. That she could make her own path, even if she didn't know yet where it would lead. The GPS wasn't set. She had no destination programmed. Behind her, the city that had tried to devour her faded into the distance. Ahead of her, the highway stretched toward the horizon. Gina pressed the accelerator and drove toward whatever came next, with her daughter asleep in the back seat and a future that, for once, belonged entirely to her. The cards stayed in her pocket. She didn't need them anymore. She'd already made her choice, and it was neither the one Andre offered nor the one Nash promised. It was freedom. Real, terrifying, uncertain freedom. And as the sun rose over the road ahead, Gina Lockwood disappeared into it, leaving behind the woman who cleaned floors and translated deals and survived kidnappings. What she became next was hers alone to decide. The Honda's taillights vanished around a curve. And the story ended the way it began, with a woman and a choice and a door she walked through on her own terms. Only this time she knew exactly what she was doing.